Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored and glad to be here and to chair this session. Unfortunately, you can't hear me. You hear me now? Yeah? I will shout. It's okay. I hope yours will work. I'm very honored to chair this session. I regret for not being able to participate in the first day and the morning of this session, because I already heard how successful and stimulating it is. But I had to teach in Beersheba, as I was nominated by Kenneth before as the Bishop of Beersheba, the Inquisitor of Beersheba. But I will try to not to be an inquisitor in my work here, and let each of you complete his talk. But we decided to change a little bit the order of speakers, and to start with Carsten Wilke from the CEU, because Carsten is there on Skype, and as you know, Skype can collapse any moment. We try to make sure that we hear him and not spend half an hour of trying to contact him again. Carsten Wilke's teaching at CEU covers Jewish history and culture from the Middle Ages to modernity, as well as other aspects of the interaction between religious cultures and communities in Europe and in the Mediterranean region. And his lecture today will be on Manuel Fernandes Vila in his diplomatic correspondence from Paris, 1644-1649, document rediscovered at the Torre. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. I hope you can hear me. Yes? So I'm sorry for this way of communication. If we were among Ashkenazim, I would say der Mensch tracht und Gott lacht. But as we are among Sephardim, I have to say, no hay bien que por mal no venga. And so let me start. Making slaves out of those whom nature has created free is not an act of obedience to God, but a negation of his work. Such aphorisms have earned the Captain Manuel Fernandes Villarreal his place in the history of Iberian political thought as one of the very rare 17th century authors who challenged the political Catholicism that was dominant in the peninsula. The burning at the stake of by the Lisbon Inquisition in December 1652 provides the tragic epilogue to his work, which historiography discovered in the 1970s, perhaps not by coincidence, during the transition period of the Iberian countries to democracy. That time, the 1970s, was still eager to discuss whether Villarreal was a martyr of Jewish minority rights, or rather a pioneer of bourgeois class consciousness, stimulated by his decade-long stay in France. Less known than his publications and his trial, Villarreal's political activity at the Portuguese embassy in Paris between 1638 and 1649 will be in the focus of this study. Recent historians of Portuguese diplomacy, such as Ana Leal de Faria and Abílio Pires Lusada, do not give him the attention that he merits, and for an understandable cause, as you will see. I will proceed in two movements. Firstly, reviewing the information that we can gather on the captain's involvement in Portuguese foreign affairs, and secondly, presenting a new manuscript source. The place of Jews and new Christians in politics is generally studied from two angles. Either they appear as objects of protection and or discrimination, or they are public defenders of Jewish interests, Stadlanim. Only recently, historiography has started to highlight their specific role in state policy, especially as go-betweens in international contexts. a new awareness of the interplay between trade diasporas and international diplomacy has changed our image of court Jews and of trans-imperial subjects, to use Natalie Rothman's expression, and I think Villarreal fits exactly in this category. Early modern Portuguese diplomacy has frequently relied on Jews or new Christians for diplomatic services, mainly in order to create connections with non-Christian rulers or with Jewish economic networks. The best publicized cases occur in the early 16th century in the Levant, India, and Morocco, and the translators, intermediaries, and spies of this period have been studied in detail by Elias Lipiner and José Alberto Tavim. Jews and new Christians appear in comparable diplomatic functions in the far-flung arms and credits dealings after the Restauração. While the most prominent among them, the merchant Jerónimo Nunes da Costa in Amsterdam, received the title of an agent of the Portuguese crown, Manuel Fernandes Villarreal and his closely connected activities in France were never officialized to the same extent. And the title of a Portuguese consul in France, which is commonly given to him in secondary literature, is owed to a misunderstanding, as we will see. Documentation on Villarreal's activities has to be gathered in rather indirect ways, and as in other cases, the Inquisition turns out to be our best source, especially regarding family history and early life. Our man was born in Lisbon in 1608. His father, who hailed from Villarreal in northern Portugal, was a cloth merchant who had made a second career in the royal tax administration. From 1622 to 1624, young Manuel served as a soldier in the Portuguese garrison of Tangier and presumably obtained there the captain's title that he used later on. He then assisted his father in the tax business and eventually rose to an administrative position, hunting evaders of the grain tax in the Mondego Valley around Coimbra. Around 1632, he married Isabel Dias, a descendant of a crypto-Jewish merchant family from Villarreal as well, and entered the large-scale trade ventures led by her cousins, João and Antonio Rodrigues de Moraes. At first, he was supposed to embark to Spanish America, but he then settled in Madrid, where he also integrated literary circles. In October 1638, he joined the brothers Moraes in Rouen, France, probably in reaction to a threat of persecution from the Inquisition. An important autobiographic document is extant on his activity during the following decade. On January 15th, 1650, in the course of the inquisitorial trial that should lead to his execution, Villarreal detailed in a long handwritten memoir the services he had accomplished in France for the independence of Portugal. We learn here that during the initial 2 years after his arrival in Normandy, Villarreal worked there as a commercial agent for his wife's brothers-in-law, the Moraes that we know already. It seems that he quickly became conversant in French and developed communicative skills that the writer François de Grenaille would describe with admiration. He was a man of pleasant conversation and has a wit that earned him many friends. People of nobility and good taste were pleased to spend time with him. The Portuguese immigrant befriended the governor of Le Havre, who happened to be a nephew of Cardinal Richelieu, and the governor introduced him to the almighty minister and other persons of power in the French capital, where Villarreal settled in 1640. After the Portuguese secession of the same year, his knowledge of his country's politics made him a sought-after source of information for the French. Moreover, he soon became a mediator in both directions. When the new kingdom sent ambassadors to France in search of an alliance, they asked Villarreal to instruct them before their arrival and to accompany them to the reception ceremonies. One of the Portuguese delegates, the Bishop of Elvas, was astonished to hear that Villarreal wished to return to Portugal, seeing the power and the respect that he enjoyed at the French court. The surprising ascent of a young new Christian businessman in the courtly sphere of power was linked to the fact that the restored kingdom of Portugal had only one experienced diplomat, who served as ambassador in The Hague and all too often had to rely on grossly unqualified individuals for diplomatic services. To mention only the most notorious case, the Marquis of Cascais damaged Portugal's reputation during his embassy to Paris by his ridiculously philandrous manners. He was said to wear a stocking of his latest mistress as a trophy on his hat. When he came to Paris in 1642 at the head of yet another Portuguese embassy, Dom Vasco Luís da Gama, the Count of Vidigueira, received contradictory advice concerning Vila-Real. His predecessor, Antonio Coelho de Carvalho, called him a young man of manifold talents, whereas the Bishop of Lamego spoke of him, and all the new Christians, by the way, as Portugal's most dangerous enemies. Dom Vasco Luís, with his independent judgment, was fond of the captain from the first moment. He chose him as his guide through the labyrinths of French court society, and even confessed to him in private that he was lost without his help. While the ambassador, followed the king to the war front, he sent Vila-Real to the audience with the queen in his stead. And when the ambassador returned in August and was received in Saint-Germain-en-Laye with a dinner, his protection of the new Christian upstart, Vila-Real, was already considered as scandalous in his Portuguese entourage. Vila-Real remembers that he had wanted to sit next to the ambassador when his other employees reminded him insistently that he had to eat with them at the servants' table. A dispute ensued. At this moment, a high French nobleman recognized the captain and invited him to dine with him at his personal table. Vila-Real claims that his collaborators never forgave him this humiliation. Especially the cleric Fray Francisco de Macedo de São Agostinho, who was supposed to be the embassy's intellectual, became Vila-Real's personal enemy when the latter criticized his custom of writing Latin verses on French personalities and asking them for money in exchange. Vila-Real warned him to stop discrediting the fatherland. Vila-Real's most conspicuous efforts, discussed even in the correspondence of King João IV, concerned the recruitment of French soldiers for the defense of Portuguese independence against Spain. In his parallel effort to harness the Portuguese merchant colony for the financial needs of the new kingdom, he obtained from King João in February 1644 the nomination as a consul of the Portuguese nation in France. In 17th century parlance, the dignity of a consul had nothing to do with the international representation of states, but meant the internal jurisdiction of merchant corporations. Vila-Real's new status was confirmed by the French king, but rejected by the Parliament of Normandy under the pressure of the Portuguese merchants who desired to stay free from Lisbon's intervention. Vila-Real thus failed to obtain any official power, and he started using spurious titles of nobility in official documents. Dom Vasco Luís, the ambassador, was made a Marquis of Niza for his second embassy from January 1647 to April 1649, when he was a kind of chief diplomat controlling Portuguese politics not only in Paris, but also in The Hague, in London, and in Rome. He took Vila-Real to his residence, still without any defined official function. Though the captain lived apart from his wife and her family, keeping his Christian and Jewish household separated between Paris and Rouen, he constantly relied on the Moorish connection when it came to the huge financial needs of Portugal's national defense. He used the networks of the Moorish for the embassy's financial transactions, and even the day-by-day postal service of the embassy was assured by the new Christian merchants. Not only Vila-Real's French elegance, but also his cautious insertion in the Jewish networks became a major asset in his diplomatic career. Vila-Real joined the Marquis of Niza when he returned to Lisbon in April 1649. His expectation was to be sent out to France once again, but this time with a royal mission and an official title. He was about to obtain these credentials when his enemy, Fray Francisco, the cleric, denounced him to the Inquisition, and we know what ensued. The imprisoned captain ended his handwritten declaration with the enumeration of his publications in favor of the Restauration, mentioning in addition 4 manuscript drafts for works on European and global history and 24 confidential memoirs on political subjects. Between 25 and 30 papers that he lists there. None of these manuscripts has ever been localized, and archival research is made difficult by the fact that the series of diplomatic correspondence with the embassy in Paris only starts in 1668. The archival remains I will characterize here have resurfaced at an unexpected place in the Portuguese National Archives at the Torre of Tombo, namely among the miscellaneous manuscripts from extant monasteries. When I consulted this collection, it was for the sake of a research interest in the Augustinian hermits in Portugal, but it quickly became clear to me that these papers had nothing to do with that religious order. Extending over dozens of volumes, there was a chaotic mass of royal decrees, correspondences, and political memoirs from the late 16th to the early 18th century. Many of these papers now seem to result from the embassy of the Marquis of Niza in Paris, and not a few turned out to be drafts in Villarreal's handwriting. By the comparison with the autobiography in the trial record leaves hardly any doubt. I wanted to show you this on the PowerPoint, but I hope you will believe me. By perusing the Miscellanea Manuscripta volumes, I have collected until now about 30 manuscript drafts in Villarreal's hand, totaling more than 100 pages. Some papers are undated, others bear dates extending between January 1644 and May 1649. Most of the materials are from the second embassy of the Marquis of Niza. One single memoir is from Lisbon, where Villarreal lived and worked for half a year before his arrest. 11 among these manuscript memoirs coincide with titles that Villarreal mentions in his autobiography. As can be concluded from the marginal comments by other hands, the drafts were not sent directly to Paris from Paris to Lisbon, but served as raw material for the ambassador's official reports. So Villarreal always stayed in the second line. The draft served a number of different purposes. The first group among them consists of protocols on talks, diplomatic talks. The second of Portuguese translations of foreign state papers. The third category are propagandistic texts in foreign languages that were meant to be launched into the controversy concerning Portugal's independence. Finally, the fourth and most numerous category are memoirs suggesting to improve Portugal's war effort, trade laws, and European image. Villarreal's manuscript coverage of his local activities concerns negotiations with French authorities, such as his effort to win French clerics to promote the Portuguese cause in Rome. His intervention in the scandal caused by the anti-inquisitorial pamphlet Politica Angelica that Antonio Enriquez Gomez had published clandestinely in Rouen, or simply the judicial persecution against a member of the embassy staff who had run into debt. As to his documentary writing, Villarreal later claimed that he had given his superior, and thereby the Portuguese government, a detailed account and analysis of current European events, most prominently on the Westphalian peace treaties. There are indeed numerous translations of documents issued during the negotiations between Spain and the Netherlands at Münster, including the political debate that was going on in the Dutch Republic concerning the inclusion of Portugal in the peace agreements. Villarreal also translated the conditions of a defensive alliance between France and the Dutch states against a possible attack by the Empire and Spain that had been signed in The Hague. Though he does not mention this at all in his declaration, Villarreal also made an effort to keep the Portuguese authorities updated on the popular uprising of the Fronde that had set Paris aflame in January 1649. In several long reports, Villarreal narrates the events of this fatidic month. We read here in Portuguese how the Queen Regent fled with Mazarin and the child Louis to Saint-Germain-en-Laye, how inside Paris the people acclaimed the Parliament, rose in arms, and forced the Bastille to surrender. Villarreal's Portuguese report is written in a neutral language, presenting both perspectives, the royal perspective and the parliamentary perspective. He seems to have partly translated his information from French pamphlets, partly gathered it himself. Villarreal also translates into Portuguese the most humble addresses by the Parliament, which had been published on January 14th with a strong protest against Cardinal Mazarin's regime, the abuses of which are described in vivid colors and translated by Villarreal. The text exists in two versions. One is Villarreal's autograph with corrections, and another is the fragment of the chancery copy. This allows to track the normal itinerary of these texts from Villarreal's pen through a chain of scribes into the hand of the Lisbon government. And it seems likely that at least some of the chancery documents in the same miscellany go back to Villarreal's work as a translator or author. On top of a second autograph report by Villarreal on the French Civil War, one can read that it was copied on January 21st. After that date, Villarreal must have added more information, as he mentions the execution of King Charles of England, calling it, I quote, an act that has occupied all this capital city. It must cause horror to all the kings of Europe and incite them to vengeance for one of the most tyrannical and evil deeds that have ever been committed, not excluding the most barbarous nations. A paragraph in another handwriting adds events on the fighting in Normandy in France. You see here that the reports by Villarreal were visibly a work in progress. Villarreal's documentary work also includes practical documentation on military matters. He lists the payment commonly received by French Navy soldiers and enumerates the costs of different kinds of ammunition on the arms market in France. He translates a Spanish tract on how to foil cavalry attacks by wooden obstacles. He has also put together a list of all the fortresses the French army holds on the Rhine, bravely mastering the difficult German place names. Beyond these papers of a documentary character, the miscellanies yield two papers that mainly follow propaganda intentions, similar to the various pamphlets that Villarreal published at the time. One is written in French against an Amsterdam city councillor who had expressed the wish of ending the war with Spain, but extending that with Portugal. The other letter draft, far more amazing, is written in Spanish to King Philip IV. Villarreal here pretends to be a memorialist from the entourage of the Marquis of Castel Rodrigo, the most notable Portuguese collaborator with Spain. The letter tries to persuade the Spanish king to accept Portugal's independence as an inevitable fact and to make a peace that would, I quote, once again unite Castilians and Portuguese in alliance and friendship. It has by now become clear, the fictitious memorialist writes, that France uses its Portuguese ally only in order to indefinitely extend its war with Spain, as the French monarchy needs ceaseless warfare in order to keep its nobility under control. That's Villarreal's judgment. Spain and Portugal now have a common interest, according to Villarreal. Their alliance would stop the progression of the Dutch overseas, it would help the empire to better resist the Turks, and most importantly, precipitate France into isolation, civil war, and self-destruction. Villarreal invokes the relief of suffering Spain, the generous reason of state, and the strengthening of Christianity for this Machiavellian move of switching Portuguese alliances from France to Spain. To the enemy, he promises that by making peace with Portugal, he would, quote, not only conserve the monarchy, but restore it after such great losses of provinces and reputation. From hindsight, one must admit that Villarreal's analysis was rather lucid and that Europe would probably look differently if it had been followed. In most of the other memoirs, Villarreal tried to work out new stratagems for Portuguese war effort against Spain and the Netherlands. The word he uses himself for this genre of writings is advertencias, cautionary notes.
Villarreal's memoirs occasionally concern the new Christian problem, though avoiding to address it explicitly. One of them translates the charter given in 1648 to immigrant Jews by the Duchess of Savoy, which Villarreal had himself negotiated. Finally, the miscellaneous papers also shed new light on the controversy around Father Antonio Vieira's plans to finance a Brazil fleet with the help of the new Christian exiles, who should in exchange be protected against inquisitorial confiscations. As we know from Villarreal's declaration, the Marquis of Niza was only reluctantly gained for the scheme, but asked the captain in 1647 to write a memoir in defense of Father Vieira, which he later sent, shortened and reworked, to Portugal in his own name. This text was published by João Lúcio de Azevedo, but Villarreal's original version was hitherto unknown. It is conserved in a copy among the drafts and details how international credit networks would react to the restriction of the confiscation are in the center of this paper. I quote, "In the course of a very short time, a large part of the riches of all Europe will enter the Kingdom of Portugal." And Villarreal says that not only the capital that its immigrants had hidden or invested abroad, but also that with foreign merchant groups would enter Portugal. Villarreal shows once more his talents as a political observer when he describes Portugal's advantageous geographic situation, which would make it the hub of European foreign trade if only the Inquisition could be fettered. Let me now draw some conclusions on the basis of the new manuscript material. It illustrates how Villarreal filled his role of a political advisor in a brilliant yet obscure manner. In an early modern diplomacy that largely consisted of the exchange of rituals between high-ranking noblemen, well-informed ghostwriters and intermediaries were in a high demand. Villarreal relied mainly on his efficient information supply from the French courts and within the European merchant networks. His papers also profited from a private library of 14 to 1500 books that he had. The presence of prohibited readings such as Machiavel and Baudin was among the first accusations that he had to face in his trial. Villarreal was motivated by this European horizon of political thought, a Machiavellian sense of statecraft, and an all-pervasive anxiety about the very survival of the restored kingdom that he served with a boundless patriotism. Villarreal's ambiguous position is not sufficiently explained by his political convictions, his class, or his putative religious faith. His function as a go-between needs to be considered if one wants to explain his peculiar stature. He bridged the cultural gaps between three circles: the Portuguese elites, French court society, and the Jewish merchant networks, being introduced into all of these spheres without being fully part of any of them. An insider-outsider paradox, as it has been described by Stephen Aschheim for a modern Jewish history, explains his success as an informal political advisor, his constant vulnerability, as well as his fatal intent to become a rank-and-file member of the diplomatic elite. He stood between languages, classes, and religions, and he hardly could have been anything else but a converso. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have, unfortunately, only a few minutes for discussion.
Carsten, do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you perfectly.
Yes? Okay. Thank you for your fascinating lecture. As always, you find not only new material but new insights. Thank you again, and you are missing us very much, but still we have the almost the illusion that you are with us together, and thank you for your cooperation. Perhaps Carsten, could it would be useful to explain a little bit to the general audience here the most known, in few words, the most known aspects of Villarreal, because Villarreal seems to be not only a converso who worked in European and particularly French politics, but he was also perhaps a converso who thought as a converso in many respects, especially concerning the idea of freedom of conscience, and most particularly the idea that maybe Portugal has to imitate Richelieu's pattern or Richelieu's modern and introduce it into Portugal and then put an end to the Inquisition. This is one general thing, and the other two little remarks. First, as far as I remember, of course, in Portugal, Machiavel and Baudin were forbidden, but not in France at all. And this explains how and why Villarreal could have Machiavel and Baudin without problem, but when he came back to Portugal, this was a source of problem with the authorities. And I was struck about what you mentioned concerning his impressions regarding criticism against Mazarin. His notes, he wrote about that. And this is perhaps, I would like to know a little bit more, because the impression I have from Villarreal is that Villarreal, he endorsed absolutism, and he endorses a strong state, but a state who makes a clear differentiation between the political and the public level and the interior and the religious level. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for this remark. I did not speak about Villarreal's political thought, because this is the best known aspect of his personality, but you are right in insisting on this point, because if you take the great study by Louis Reich-Torgau on the political thought of the Restauration of the 1640s, he has an enormous quantity of authors, but there's only Manuel Fernandes Villarreal and Antonio Enriquez Gomes, who was not a Portuguese, who adopt a point of view that defends the freedom of religion, at least on a secret level. That means that everybody needs to belong to the official church, but there is no inquiry about private religious practice. And this was very extraordinary for Spanish and Portuguese thought, so that for this time in the theological political thought we have all the thinkers of Portugal on the one side and Villarreal on the other side, which shows sufficiently his originality. Some of his originality derives from his stay in France, of course, as you said, where Machiavelli and Baudin could be had freely and was even part of the official doctrine. But I think cultural transfer is never automatic. And there were many Portuguese in France, all the staff of the embassy, for example, but there was only Villarreal who incorporated French thought about religious liberties into his own system. So I would say that there needed to be a certain acceptance for these kinds of ideas, and this is certainly acceptance that is owed to Villarreal's own situation inside Portugal and his experience as a new Christian. So I think that there is still to be done between his own social background, his political activity, and his thought. But in my talk I could not go so far.
What about Mazarin?
Oh, Mazarin, excuse me, I glossed over the question. So Mazarin is mentioned in Villareal's reports from the Fronde uprising. So these are amazingly neutral reports. He wanted to give the Portuguese government the most precise possible idea of what was going on in all this French turmoil. Mm-hmm. And he translated all the criticism and all the polemics, or the major texts at least, that the Parliament had published or circulated in these violent days, with all the criticism against Mazarin. As I quoted from the other text in which he reflects upon the execution of King Charles of England, his point of view was probably on the side of the royal authorities. Wow. I have that impression, but he did not. He was neutral enough, and he was objective enough to represent the parliamentary outlook as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much again. And we take